Out of all the ways I like to start sermons, it's usually an entertaining story. It's usually something that's a true story. Well, all the time it's a true story. But a comedian that I've referenced in the past, I won't name him because he doesn't love Jesus, and sometimes he says bad words. But he brought up his upbringing in a church, and he said he enjoyed it when going to church, the guy would blatantly make up a story, trying to relate it to the passage, and he decided church was a bunch of people who were doing a book report, and it should have been way better because they had the book for 2,000 years. I thought that was a pretty clever point. But I have to start my sermon this morning with an apology. So as we started out this entire series in Daniel, we wanted our hope and our confidence to be in who God is. And the idea why Daniel was written is to showcase the exemplary public faith by putting our own faith in God despite the social and political circumstances until the end of days. And I made this really long argument for why the book of Daniel was written when it was written, because it prophesies things that are so historically accurate that they had to have been written after the fact, according to anyone with common sense. Unfortunately, what I said out loud was not the correct date, so please forgive me. This book was written in 6th century BC. I do not believe it was written in 2nd century BC. 2nd century BC means it was written after the fact. Everyone's correct. There is no God outside of space and time who can pierce the veil and show us the truth. And if I get up here on a Sunday, my only job is to say truthful things. So when I mess up, I will own it in front of you all and say, I'm sorry. So it might have been nerdy, but it was very wrong, and I messed up, so please forgive me, y'all. It's 6th century BC. Yeah, right, yeah. Burn me at the stake after church, tell my daughter I loved her, and we'll move on. But anyway, as we go into this story, though, probably, oh gosh, it's that kind of morning. So, as we go on in our story, we know from this that we have teenagers who have been taken from the land they were raised. Who knows if their parents were alive? They're off to grad school, and they're offered all these great things to eat, and they decide to humbly obey God instead of live out the way everyone else is living. And so our big idea from last week was that our reasonable and resilient faith in God will always provide evidence of Him to even the most powerful adversaries we face. And now I'm going to be as outrageous as I possibly can be, not to anger anybody, but to be realistic. If you found out that people from the government were sent to kill you, what would your response be? You know that the president has ordered a hit squad to come to your house and kill you and your family. What's our response as people? Get a gun. Thank you for being honest. That's our red-blooded American response. They're out to get me. I'm going to fight back. So this morning we see something very, very different. Once again, I get you can be scared as a teenager and not stand up and fight, but at a risk of a beheading, they gave up eating some of the best food on the planet, literally probably at that time the best food on the planet, in obedience to God. And we'll get to the details of the dream that's coming the following week. But today I want to focus in a little bit on what we do in prayer. Because we read these stories in Daniel, we hear them in Sunday school, and we're like, yeah, the guy had some weird dreams. And we know from chapter 1 that God's given Daniel this weird ability to understand dreams. But there's this prayer that happens. We don't have the words to it, but I want to focus today our minds and hearts on prayer and talking to God. And so there's this pastor that I quote way too often, but I put it on the church website, so this is my working definition of prayer at all times, so one of you gives me a better one. But prayer is continuing a conversation that God has started through His Word and His grace, which eventually becomes a full encounter with Him. That's a very lengthy, beautiful, apt description. But let's be realistic. How many of you have forgotten to pray before and just did your daily routine because it's your daily routine? You get up, you feed the kids, you go to work, you do your routine, you come home, you kiss your spouse, you get ready for bed, and you're just like, oh, I did my day. I didn't need supernatural help or intervention. But as one author named Jared Wilson points out, and he says, when we're not engaged in prayer, it's because we feel like we got this. And if you remember, I had a wow, I'm old moment twice in the past year. The first talking to a student who was 19 years old and realizing they were not alive during 9/11. I was like, oh, that's a wake-up call. And then later I discovered that it's been 25 years since they began filming the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's like, oh no, I'm getting up there. This is a problem. But as we see time go on, we can get used to the routines and the rhythms. But if you were alive during this thing where some very evil people flew planes into buildings to try to kill as many people as possible, what was the motto of the United States for years after that incident? God bless America. There's people gathering for public prayer, people constantly going back to God, people for the first time coming to know the Lord. And it was because they see this horrible thing in the world and struggle with the answers to why. And the whole time we've had the answer, but suddenly there was this urge and this need. And the response we've had as a church for a long time, culture has been, man, there's these atheists that believe X, Y, Z, so we need to have the best rational scientific arguments. right now, I'm going to call it paganism, but I'm not trying to be mean or critical. But there's a growing group of people, far more than neo-atheism, of people who believe in spiritual things. They're spiritual but not religious. That is the majority of people you will interact with anywhere in the United States. They're spiritual. They're seeking something. They know something's out there. The atheism thing doesn't quite seem to line up with their view of reality, so they're seeking something else. And the passage we have this morning is amazing and beautiful because while we'll focus on prayer, it shows us that we have a supernatural source of everything, of life, wisdom, intelligence, and it's outside of the capacity of time. And even Einstein gave us theories of relativity and all these beautiful arguments to help understand the universe as God has given it to us. And even modern thinkers have to try to understand in ways of disproving God because therefore X, Y, and Z in quantum physics means that there can't really be a creator God because then we'd see a marker and evidence. I believe it was, he had the talk box in a wheelchair, and I should have written his name down because he was brilliant. Stephen Hawking, one of the most brilliant human minds ever to live. He is brilliant. I'm not going to mock him for his intelligence because in a room with him, I'm the dummy, right? Stephen Hawking was brilliant. But he wrote this paper disproving God, and I agreed with his paper because the God he described is not the God of the Bible. And I was like, yeah, that God doesn't exist either. We can't find evidence for it. But now the growing number of people in the country don't really seek, hey, there's going to be all these perfect explanations. There does seem to be some kind of spiritual world, and I want to have access to it. There's in 5 longings of the human heart, one of them is a sense of transcendence, of an outside power and influence and escaping out into it. And my suggestion for us this morning is that is actually how God made us to be. He designed every human heart and mind with the longing to understand something outside of themselves. And some people try to get that from culture. We talked last week and the week before about our identities and where those can come from. But this morning it's all about God and how beautiful and supernaturally powerful He is. So without further ado, we are finally to Daniel chapter 2. It'll be up on the screen. I'm sticking to just Daniel 2 this morning. But I will always intentionally flip through here because if you're younger and you're like, I don't know where something is in the Bible, if it took your pastor a minute, it can take you a minute, and that's totally okay. A while back, they had tabs. Remember when tabs made their rounds? Everyone's like, I have a tab for every book of the Bible. You can get there faster, but I'd rather you naturally just come to, hey, I was reading the Bible the other day, and I realized I kept reading a little bit longer, and now I know that Daniel's next to Hosea, instead of making you go memorize a list. But so now in our story, we've continued on, and we know that Daniel's been given this gifting by God. He's blessed these 4 friends with powers and abilities of discernment and wisdom, so the government's even employing them. But one night during the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had such disturbing dreams that he couldn't sleep. He called in his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers. If your Bible says Chaldeans, I nerded out on it. Guess what? The Chaldeans at this point were just known for being astrologers. What's great is 100 years after this, 500 BC, the astrologers, these people trying to find spiritual meaning from the stars, were so good at math that one of their scholars predicted 365 days in a year, and his math was only off by 6 hours, and I believe 52 minutes and like 11 seconds. I might be getting the seconds and the minutes off, but that's how closely in 500 BC these people were able to predict the annual calendar and the seasons. Like, they were smart. So when we read astrologers, we're like, okay, they checked their horoscopes and they went about their day. No, these were brilliant mathematicians. These were people the king trusted to give him advice and counsel. And he demanded they tell him what he had dreamed. As they stood before the king, he said, I've had a dream that deeply troubles me, and I must know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic. And from this point until chapter 7, whole books in a language I don't speak. I know Hebrew and Greek. They're dead languages. I'm going off a lot of scholars here, but the language transitions. They respond in Aramaic, and that's where the flow of the text continues. It says, and the astrologers answer in Aramaic, long live the king. Good thing to say first when you're in front of the king. Tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means, which is a very rational response, right? Was that a crazy ask? Your friend said, I had a wacky dream. Your next question is, what was it? So they're asking a very fair, rational question. But the king said to the astrologers, I am serious about this. If you don't tell me what my dream was and what it means, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. That escalated quickly. I know that's a little meme, but like that escalated very quickly. I had a bad dream. I'm sorry to my parents, as a little kid, I had vivid nightmares, and I'd go running into their bedroom, freaking out, because the dream was so real, I was terrified. But I told them what it was. I was never like, well, until you tell me the dream, you can't give me a hug. No, I was terrified, and I needed people to comfort me. But so this guy's just going nuts. He's so freaked out by what he's seen in his dreams, he's going to murder his advisors unless they can tell him what he himself dreamed without him telling. And if you don't do it, we're going to rip you limb from limb. We're going to turn your house into a pile of rubble. But if you tell me what I dreamed and what the dream means, I will give you many wonderful gifts and honors. Just tell me the dream and what it means. Is this a reasonable boss to work for? No. Have you ever worked for someone before that had outrageous, unreasonable demands and you were unable to meet them because it was cuckoo pants? Yeah, you've all experienced at least once. That's what happened here. They're all like, hey, we don't have powers, but like we have discernment, we have we have ways of helping you if you would just tell us, stop trying to murder us, and like we will help you. But he's being completely unfair, completely unreasonable, and demanding. And they say, again, please, your majesty, tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means. The king replied, I know what you are doing. You're stalling for time. I want to highlight that. They're stalling for time, and he knows it, because you know I'm serious when I say, if you don't tell me the dream, you are doomed. So you've conspired to tell me lies, hoping I will change my mind, but tell me the dream, and then I'll know that you can tell me what it means. Which actually might be pretty healthy and skeptical. How many of you have ever had someone tell you they've received a message from a supernatural being before? Has that happened? Sometimes has it ever come true, and then sometimes it's just been like, no, God did not tell you to give me your car for all of time. Like, it's just something so out there and crazy. But at this point, he's developed a healthy sense of skepticism, saying, hey, these guys are smart, but they might be scheming. So under the threat of death, unless you can prove to do what you claim to be able to do, I'm going to kill you. So you've conspired telling me lies, hoping I'll change my mind, but tell me the dream, and then I'll know you can tell me what it means. The astrologers replied to the king, no one on earth can tell the king his dream. And no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. The king's demand is impossible. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they do not live here among people. And I want to stress that point. Even the people that probably did have relationships with demonic spirits, because spiritual world is real and it exists. My caveat there is spiritual warfare is not you go get your Bible and then like grab someone and shake them until the demon comes out. There's three things with spiritual warfare. There's your own flesh, sin nature, according to the Bible. Part of spiritual warfare is our own contribution to the problem. Second part of spiritual warfare is the world, the culture we live in. And the third part is demonic forces as well. These guys were all three. They were lying, they were swindling, they were going along with what the culture was doing, and some of them probably did have some weird chats with demons at certain points, because demons do have powers. And so they were blatantly working for the enemy, and the king was furious when he heard this, because their gods couldn't give the answers. These gods don't interact with people. These gods aren't going to give you what you want, because they don't care about you. And so the king was furious when he heard this, and he ordered that all the wise men of Babylon be executed. Because of the king's decree, men were sent to find and kill Daniel and his friends. We could argue all day long, and we could have a very good intellectual debate on exactly how old Daniel's friends were. It was likely about 3-4 years, maybe less. There's good arguments for 2 years. These people are still teenagers. A group of teenagers have found there's a group of men sent by the government to come and murder them, because they are part of the group that the king wants gone, because they're not trustworthy, they're not helpful. And so when Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, came to kill them, Daniel handled the situation with wisdom and discretion. If we agreed earlier, we grab our guns when the government's coming to get us, this is a pretty weird example. He handled it with wisdom and discretion, and he asked Arioch, why has the king issued such a harsh decree? I want to highlight this for all of us. If we engage with people who don't believe in God, with arguments and the reasons for why we are right and we believe in the right thing, and we don't start by asking questions, a lot of people probably won't listen to us. So my encouragement for all of us, if we think this is the God of the universe, we trust in Jesus, we believe he rose from the dead, we believe the songs we sing where we now have freedom. It's beautiful to sing together with you. That second song, we're free indeed because of what Christ has done for us. But he responds to this, finding out, hey, you're about to get executed. May I ask why? And so Arioch told him all that had happened, and Daniel went at once to see the king. And what did he request? More time to tell the king what the dream meant. For a king who was just really mad at a bunch of people stalling for time, why would he give someone more time? Because Daniel didn't Daniel didn't make excuses. He didn't say it was impossible. He didn't say, hey, we just need this. He said, hey, if you give me time, I will give you an answer. He was direct, he was clear, and he trusted that God would give him what was needed. And up until this point, we know he knew the words of the prophet Jeremiah, but there was nothing in Jeremiah saying, hey, Daniel, there's going to be this guy named Nebuchadnezzar. He's going to have some weird demands, and unless you go pray about it, God's going to not save you. So definitely pray. Jeremiah never got that specific. And so what happens next is he has a confidence that God knows everything. And that can be really comforting or really uncomfortable depending on how your day or week was. My focal point today is definitely on prayer, and that our God sees beyond the veil of time, and we can gain confidence and truth by seeking him in prayer. Is your parents knowing everything when you were 15 a good thing or a bad thing? I feel very sorry for teenagers today, and I'm not bashing any parent that does it. It's a world I wouldn't want to grow up in. One of our students that I have a good relationship with was telling me, yeah, we have this app on our phones, and it'll tell my parents when I speed and how fast I was going and for how long I sped and what stretch of the road I was speeding. I was like, I am so sorry. That sounds like a nightmare. Yeah, definitely obey your parents, definitely obey the speed limits. Like, teenagers are going to do stuff sometimes. And if you now can track them on an app, like what hope do the teenagers have? So the idea that God knows everything can be terrifying depending on our current view of God. We sing songs all the time about how God is a good, good father, but depending on your own relationship growing up with your dad, that might be a bad thing in your mind to relate God to being a father figure. We all come from different places and different walks of life, but knowing that God knows everything was really, really good news for Daniel, right? We know the story. We know that Daniel lives. We know he was successful because we all went to Sunday school. But he knew that God knew everything. So to save his life and his friend's life, and it turns out everyone's life, even the lying scumbags who were trying to cheat and would eventually go on to try to get him killed multiple occasions, he saved them too. Because he knew we can trust that God knows everything. And so that's our first point this morning, is we can trust God knows everything. And if that's scary and terrifying, that's okay. I'm not here to tell you you're a bad Christian. What I'm here to suggest is if it scares you that God knows everything, the more you learn about God, the more comforting it gets. Because he would have known, along with his friends, Hananiah and Azariah and Mishael, they would have known that God revealed his character to Moses and that he is slow to anger. He's filled with unfailing love. And we know this because it said constantly throughout the Old Testament they would have had until the time of captivity. They would have known the more they know and trust God. The fact, as we've mentioned before, Daniel's name means God is my judge. That's a good thing. Because their judges were not people that sat on high and told you, hey, you're going to prison. They are people that lived among you and did their best to defend and know you and live your daily life with you. So having a God outside of space and time, Daniel confidently could say, give me time and I will tell you what your dream meant. So if we are uncomfortable this morning with the fact that God knows everything, I'm going to tell you a personal story where I was bad at being a good husband and God was really funny. So I have this devotional, and if you have children and you don't have one yet, I'll get it to you. We gave them out during child dedications, but it's called Praying Through the Bible for Your Kids. And it's very well written, and some days are better than others for how good you feel after the prayer, because you're like, oh, that was a little bit convicting. So, shockingly, sometimes I fight with my spouse because I think I'm right, and she thinks she's right. If you've ever been in a dating relationship or married, that never happens to you. But if you can just pretend for a minute that sometimes a couple will get into a fight because they both think they're right. I was like, okay, we had a fight. We still need to just at least pray for our child because, like, bare minimum, let's pray for the kid. We'll get to the praying for our marriage after the end. And what was the devo that night? It was, hey, when you fight in front of your kid, here's how to respond in obedience to God. And I was like, okay, my bad. So God knew that I was going to get into a fight. He knew that I was going to own a book, that night on devotion, we go from fighting into praying about how we as Christians can handle our fighting in front of our children and obey God. It's really good that God knows everything. Because you could say that's a coincidence, that's an accident, but as we're about to see, if this account in Daniel is true, God really knows everything. And so that's my encouragement for us, is if you're scared of it, ask yourself, hey, what part of God is scary? Is that part of God that I've assumed? Is that part of God we find in his word? Or is that part of God that I've been told by someone who yelled at me when I was 5 and says, if you get a tattoo, Satan's going to come take you all the way to hell? I don't know. Like, fill in the blank. I had a teacher in 6th grade, thought I cussed, and so told the whole class publicly that my family was going to die in a car crash unless I came and repented to the class for saying a swear word. My dad can back me up. My mom washed my mouth out with soap. I did not cuss at school. I messed up once or twice. I got my mouth washed out at home, but at school, definitely didn't cuss. So if you've had that experience where someone has come and told you, this is who God is, he's coming to get you, and he knows everything you've done, it's like an evil version of Santa Claus that's coming to wipe you out. But what we have in the Bible is a God like he knew and all of his friends knew, who's slow to anger, filled with unfailing love. And he does not judge us as harshly as we deserve, according to the poet King David. So then after this, Daniel went home and told his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah what had happened. He urged them to ask the God of heaven to show them his mercy by telling them the secret, so they would not be executed along with the other wise men of Babylon. You think that was a relaxing prayer group? When you guys meet up for D groups, I'm sure there's stressful, real things that happen in your lives you get to share with one another and pray, but usually you're not praying knowing if you don't get this one answered immediately that God's going to come wipe you out via the government, right? Hopefully that hasn't happened in your D groups yet. Don't think it will in a lifetime. But in all of this, they knew God had the answer, so where did they go? To the guy with the answers. And asked him as a group, saying, hey, we know God knows, so let's find out from him, because he can reveal things before they happen. He can reveal everything in the hearts of man, because he even told us we were going to go into captivity. So my point for all of us is, first, as we said, we can trust that God knows everything, but we must seek him in prayer. We do it less because our daily routines in life is very constant and draining and difficult. And we get used to the rhythms and routines, and I'm sure most of us could perform CPR with having to pray to remember how to do it. You just pump the chest to staying alive, you puff in, plug a nose hole, and like, hey, they're okay. And then the CPR people show up and like, oh, that's so outdated. But the idea, though, is we can get into rhythms where we just reflexively know what to do, and we stop seeking God in prayer. They had no other option. They had no source other than a divine being who could tell them exactly what the king's dream was. As we see in verse 19, that night the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision, and then Daniel praised the God of heaven. But if you're like me, you get into daily life and it's doable. The analogy from a whole book on prayer, that this is where our church defines prayer from, but Tim Keller's book on prayer, he's saying we can get used to rowing when we could be sailing. How many of you have been in a kayak going upstream or on a lake with wind and no current in any direction? Are you tired about 5 minutes into that? Yeah, I grew up without rivers. I grew up with the ocean. I hated kayaking. And then friends, when I moved to Tennessee, took me kayaking down a river, and I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. I have to steer. That is it. If I want to go slightly faster, I can have some fun, but I don't have to do much work with this. And that's how what can happen to each and every one of us is, man, I'm used to rowing, so I'm just going to keep rowing. And God's saying, you can talk to me freely and completely. And the Spirit of the eternal God, the uncreated one, goes and dwells inside every person who repents and follows him. And we're like, I got this. We get a little bit cocky. And so I like the analogy. I'll adapt it to Tennessee. Instead of rowing in the ocean, you could be rowing downstream and only just, hey, you're participating, but God's the one moving you. And that's what they saw with their prayer. They saw that the only option left was to completely rely on God to reveal something new. And then they write a really good song, and if anyone wants to write more worship music, we can always use more good worship music. There's hymns from hundreds of years ago that are fantastic. There's hymns from 100 years ago that are also bad. There's songs from right now that are musically beautiful and lyrically just like crayon writing and like talking all about what God did for me and nothing about who God is. It doesn't matter. There's always good Christian music being written, and there's always bad Christian music. But this is a song that they sing in praise to God. He says this, whether it's poetry or song, we don't know if they composed it or it was just given to them in a moment, but praise the name of God forever and ever. Stephen, great job picking the song. We can sing of your love forever because we just sang the same words. We can sing of your love forever and ever, for he has all wisdom and power. He controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings. I'm going to repeat that because it's 2024 and no one's relaxed right now. This is still true about God right now, despite the fact we invented democracy with the Greeks. Verse 21, let's repeat this. Let's remember this ourselves as we go out this week. He controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars, which is beautiful. I want to pause on that one because I picked on us. Now here's a positive. Picked on us at the first part we need to remember, but the second part, let's contemplate that for a minute. He gives the wisdom. He gives knowledge. Have we invented some really cool stuff since Daniel was alive? Yeah. Last week I mentioned the Dorito, that if you've eaten a Dorito chip, you have had more seasons and flavoring in one chip than most people alive for the course of human history had ever had across their entire lives. And it gets better than that. We can have animal meat anywhere on the planet anytime. I've eaten antelope sliders next to the ocean in San Diego, and there's no antelope nearby. It was at the Wild Animal Park, but I don't think they let me hunt them. Like they shipped it from anywhere in the world. We have access to these amazing things. We've sent people to space. We have an Air Force base where they're inventing new exciting things all the time. If you have a heart problem, can you go see a doctor who can cut open your chest cavity, fix the issues with your heart, and send you home to recover? Yeah. Has God also supernaturally healed people? Also, yes. But I love technology, but we find a way to mess it up eventually. But I want us to see that every good gift, if this is true, if Daniel's correct, God gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. That means every great human advancement, every innovation, the invention of the airplane, everything we have to appreciate and enjoy, we should be thanking God for it. I don't have it up on the screen because I just want it to get ingrained in us, but in prayer, the easiest model to remember is Acts. Adoration is the A, C is confession, the T is thanksgiving, and the S is the weird word supplication, but it just means asking for stuff. So in our prayers, we don't have Daniel's, but we have Jesus teaching us how to pray. We adore God for who he is. And sometimes you're in the middle of the workday and something goes wrong, you just say, God, help, and guess what? He does. He hears you, and he always answers your prayers, just sometimes the answer is no or wait. It's not always, here's what the king was dreaming. But in adoration, we tell God we love him for who he is. Then we confess how we have fallen short of his glory. Then we thank him for what he's blessed us with. And then we ask him for what we need. And if we get into that healthy rhythm, it's a lot easier to trust God because we don't start with what we need. And then if we have time, fill in the blank with a couple other things. And yeah, it slows you down. But if God has given us all of this truth, we go on in verse 22, he says, he reveals deep and mysterious things and knows what lies hidden in darkness, though he is surrounded by light. And on the advent of it's been 25 years since one of my favorite movie trilogies was filmed, contemplating on the downfall of modern movies of the darkness is actually misunderstood and we just need to make friends with the darkness and then everything will be okay. The storytelling's pretty lame. But when you have stories of light versus darkness and good versus evil, and the light shines victorious, the first light on the first dawn of the third day, whatever Tolkien said, those moments inspire us because you've seen in war when the clouds break and light comes onto the battlefield and they survive and they found out they made it through. Those are the moments that lift our spirits. I know Twilight made vampires way too popular for a couple minutes, but my vampires burn up and die in sunlight because they're monsters. Because the mythos of the vampire is something that wants to live forever by feeding off other people. That's why the myth has lasted for so long. It's why Olivia Rodrigo wrote a song called Vampire, because it doesn't matter how long we get away from Vlad the Impaler, we still recognize there's people in the world that only want things for themselves, and they will suck anyone dry of everything they have to give and offer in order that they get what they want. And these are the people Daniel and his friends were surrounded by. But we know that God reveals deep and mysterious things, knows what lies hidden in darkness, though he is surrounded by light. And so I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors, for you have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me what we asked of you and revealed to us what the king demanded. That's a really good song. If someone is good at writing music, please make this into a song. Let's sing it every Sunday. But this is really good news because first we know we can trust that God knows everything. We must seek him in prayer, but we also know we will always be reminded that God is the ultimate authority. Because in a world gone very wrong, it wasn't going well for Daniel and his people at the time, but they knew from the prophet Jeremiah that things were not going to get better. It's going to get worse before things got better. And what did Jesus tell us? Our final sermon series at the end of summer, I focused on Matthew 24, and this is my theology, this is my argumentation. This is the church for you if you agree Jesus is coming back and he wins. We can argue about dates and times and places on a lot of areas, but if Jesus says that when I go, that is the beginning of the end of times, the end of times has been about 2,000 years long so far. So waiting for those end of days when everything finally goes really wrong, according to Jesus, that started the minute he ascended. And we know the good news. We know that he's victorious. We know that he returns, and that anyone who follows him, hears his name, and calls upon God to save him will be saved. We know that we are inheritors of God's entire kingdom. We know that this God who sees us in our worst moments has already probably planned a really convicting prayer devotional you're going to read 20 minutes later. He knows that everything in your family's life, the health, the heartbreak, the illness, the beauty, the joy, the sorrow, he is aware of every single moment. And if we can recognize this need, to recognize that our God sees beyond the veil of time, we can gain confidence and truth by seeking him in prayer. And now when you all go home this week, You're not going to suddenly have a vision from God where it's like, oh, the stock market's going to do this next week, so make sure to buy this stock and dump that one so you can get personally wealthy. That one ain't in the book. Jesus says something the opposite about how your wealth and riches are going to go if you follow him. We're in this unprecedented point in human history where the United States let a lot of people worship very freely and become very influential and successful without basically any persecution. Sure, there's disagreements and people argue on the internet. I need to stop. I uninstalled Reddit for the 87th time this year, so I stop arguing with strangers on the internet. But all of us, if we stop the arguing, we stop recognizing, hey, we've been blessed with unprecedented peace. No matter how this year goes, no matter what happens in the future, our God, it's cheesy because it's a song, but it's not cheesy because it's true, our God remains the same. Every single time. Who did he praise God as at the end here? I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. For you have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me what we asked of you and revealed to us what the king demanded. While you might not get a spectacular vision of the future, you might not get something crazy, some of you are still going to go to work tomorrow morning and have a boss that's going to make unrealistic demands and expectations and treat you poorly. I hope they don't. I hope you see better things. Seeing that in people's lives is heartbreaking. Because the second we forget that we're not better than anybody else, because the whole thing of the gospel is there is God, and then there is us. And the message of the gospel shows us that I'm not better or worse than any one of you according to God because of the blood of Jesus Christ. And so if I get on my high horse and I see, oh, they're sinning over there doing that sin I don't sin at, oh, what a loser. We can start getting a little bit cocky with it. But if we can remind ourselves that the person who's mistreating us is also made in the image of God, also is going to be accountable to God. Because my third point today with this morning was God has the ultimate authority. Right now, you crave justice. Everybody craves justice. Some people are called social justice warriors, and if I read the room right, you probably don't like those people as much as others. But the heart of justice is something we should find as a connection point for others. Because we're not going to get there today. This is the end of our passage this morning. We're focusing on the fact that we can pray to a God who can see beyond the veil of time. Daniel and his friends go on to save the lives of the people who would go on to betray them. Daniel and his friends continually faithfully serve a fallen empire that is not in obedience to God. And then even a later chapter in Daniel isn't written by Daniel. It's written by Nebuchadnezzar himself, admitting that God actually is who he said he was. Because he got brought to this brokenness and a point of lowliness. And my hope for each and every one of us is if we can build up that practice of prayer and reliance on God, trust in who he really is, that he is this beautiful and transcendent. He's not just this lawgiver who has organized the world into a perfect little black and white set of boxes, but an infinite number of choices, which sadly does not result in the multiverse. I'm sorry, I don't believe. An unseen realm with unseen beings, which I'm arguing for the same thing, but I'm calling them angels and demons and a creator God. But if we believe this is true, he who has the power and authority, he places the kings, he displaces the kings, he gives all the scholars, all the knowledge, all the wisdom, and blesses us. Who do we have to thank for every good thing? Deaf children can have cochlear implants. People born with heart defects can have robots attached to their heart called pacemakers and keeps them alive for decades. Children that are born at 18 months old, real tiny, can survive now, or not 18 months, no, that's past you. Sorry. This is back to me saying 6th century versus 2nd century. So I married someone good at math, y'all. Anyway, sorry. 18 weeks old. There was a child born at 18 weeks old, and they kept her alive, and last I checked, it was about a year ago, she was 4. There are continuing advancements, there's continuing beauty, and we have all of this to thank that God gave it to us. And so my hope for us this morning is that we can say, hey, maybe this week I have been good at praying, and this is, I feel kind of convicted. God knew you were going to have a week where you're bad at praying and knew we were going to talk about prayer a little bit because we're going to get to the visions and the story, what that all means. But if we don't see, in the moment he's about to be killed, he's like, let's have a prayer group really quick. That seems kind of foolish. That is the wrong response for a rational human being in 2024. If people are coming with guns to get us, we get them before they get us. I talked about it last week. I'll probably talk about it almost every week during my preaching of this, but there's these old 2 books from the band DC Talk about people that have been martyred for their faith. I cannot find a story where people rallied together and fought back, and then suddenly more people became Christians. And this is the uncomfortable truth of the world we live in, because even the Atlantic said the other day about the Olympics, we now live in a world where dignity in defeat is no longer a virtue. That's a really good point, but guess who probably led the charge on that cultural movement? I'm going to blame myself and Christians. Because the point that Paul preached time and time again was Christ and Him crucified. That means when Jesus got up and took the loss for all of us, we won. The resurrection is a beautiful, glorious truth we trust and believe in, and that affirms the truth of what Jesus did on the cross. It gives us a hope and a bodily resurrection. But we got so excited about the fact, did you know I'm actually a winner, that we stopped being good at being losers. No one wants to be a loser, right? Anybody? Sign me up to be a loser? I was proud when that girl from Chattanooga won the weightlifting competition for the United States for gold. It was like, yeah, from Tennessee. I've been to Chattanooga. I may have sat next to her and eaten with her because that's the USA, baby. We won. When someone from the USA does something as bad as the Australian breakdancer, I'm like, oh, shame. We don't want to talk to you. We want to disown you. We don't like you. So in this book of Daniel, it is a book of people that were losers and defeated time and time again, but faithfully trusted God, and God used them, despite the fact, culturally, they were losers the entire time. And so that's my hope for all of us is no matter how 2024 goes, no matter what goes beyond that, if we can recognize the person we can pray to because of the blood of Jesus Christ knows everything, we can talk to Him in prayer, and He'll listen and He'll answer. And you don't have to use special names. You don't have to use a recipe. You don't need a magic potion. You don't need anything other than to say, Father. Even if you can't spell Yahweh because you know that the Jewish people took out the vowels because they were too scared, you just say, Dad, I need help. God will hear you. It doesn't matter if you've been an atheist your entire life. It doesn't matter if you've been a Christian since the age of 4. Anyone who prays to the Creator of the universe, God will hear and God will answer. And that's the confidence I want for all of us this morning. Because if you're like me, things get tiring. I love my kid so much. Do I love a routine of waking up at the same exact time every day? Heck no. You can get into routines that bore you. You can get into things that distract you. Real life can become so frustrating. You can get so disappointed that you're like, God must not really care about me. So why should I pick up the phone to talk to Him? And so my reminder for us this morning is He infinitely does. He is who He says He is, and He proved that with Jesus Christ. So I'm going to repeat our final point. We're going to pray and then get back to worshiping Him. Our God sees beyond the veil of time. And we can gain confidence and truth by seeking Him in prayer. Sometimes the truth, if you're like me, will be very uncomfortable that, hey, I'm part of the problem. Other times the truth will be very comforting that despite the way you're being treated by your boss, despite the frustrations you have in your daily life, there is an ultimate accountability to the Creator of everything. And we can turn to Him at any moment and talk with Him. So let's do that right now and worship Him. Dear Father in heaven, thank You for this true story about outrageous demands, unreasonable requests, the threat of death, and a group of 4 teenagers that said, hey, maybe we should check with the guy who's in charge. It's not the king of this realm we've been brought to live in. It's not the captain of the guard. It is the Creator of the universe. They didn't know they'd be thrown into a giant pit of fire. They didn't know they'd be having a slumber party with a bunch of lions. They didn't know what was coming, Lord, but we do. So, Lord, as we recognize this truth of a bunch of scared teenagers having confidence in You, we can have that same confidence, Lord. Please, by Your Spirit, encourage us to seek You in prayer as a family, as individuals, while we're driving to work, while we're angry and frustrated with the daily responsibilities of life, Lord. Please let us take them to You because You see through and in all things, and You are in control, God. We love You and cannot praise You enough for who You really are. In Jesus' name, amen.